Hi everyone, I'm Sam Talbot. I'm a partner at iGaming Collective and working alongside Martin, who's leading the brand panel there, and James Connolly. And we've been in the industry for around 10, 15 years. And our consultancy now focuses on Europe, North America, Africa, and the UK, helping brands build out product, marketing, MarTech, and kind of go-to-market strategies. For the 10 years previous to that, I worked at Bet365, Skybet, PokerStars, and PremierBet, who's one of the biggest brands in Africa. And my focus was largely on MarTech and how to build out product and marketing teams that come together to form MarTech and customer experience ecosystems. Obviously, there's loads of challenges and opportunities within that space, and so we'll try and spend the next 30 minutes talking about those. So without further ado, please make a round of applause for John, Moshe, and James, who will be joining me. Thank you. Thanks, guys. So before we start, I think just quick introductions. If you just introduce yourself, your role, and your experience within MarTech.
Yes. Hey, guys. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Jean. I work at Betsson Group. I've been in the world of digital marketing for around 10 years, and for the last 5 years, I've been working in gaming. I started gaming in working in technical SEO, and getting a bit exposed to working with different teams like product, UX, data. And then over the last year and a half, I grew into a marketing technology role. So now my team, which is called Marketing Platforms, we optimize our acquisition channels for better returns and more operational speed. And we bridge the departments between commercial and product data sort of thing.
Brilliant. James?
Yep, I'm James. I work at PressEnter as head of digital marketing. I started off actually in pharmaceutical advertising or drug dealing, essentially. And then moved into the world of publishing, looking after ad tech and MarTech within that industry before jumping into iGaming with Kindred. And yeah, through my career, I've been looking after essentially ad tech, data, MarTech solutions, mostly on the acquisition side, but have quite a sort of, good coverage on both elements. That's me.
Right.
Hello, everyone. Moshe Demri. I'm the VP Revenue at Optimove. Been working in the iGaming industry for probably around a decade now, mainly focusing on helping operators with their retention efforts. So I've done lots of CRM consulting and helping some of the biggest gaming brands in the world to actually build their marketing tech stack. So looking forward for the session today.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys. So look, I think MarTech, generally speaking, is a bit of an enigma. I think everyone in every room in this building has probably had some sort of experience working within MarTech. I think every panel so far has mentioned something that people probably think is MarTech. But there seems to be this kind of lack of proper investment into building a fully sustainable, long-term MarTech ecosystem. I think even at iGaming Next, as the kind of leaders of MarTech community, MarTech only gets a 30-minute panel and everyone else gets 40 minutes. So that's the kind of world that we live in at the moment, and I think it's really interesting to understand, how we kind of break down those barriers and get more people invested into really building the how. I think everyone kind of understands the what and the why of what we're trying to do as businesses and as operators, but really the how we kind of build all this together is really interesting and complex world. So I think it'd be good to start with that, and maybe Jean have a bit of a conversation around how you get the rest of the business to buy into really committing, particularly from a product point of view, and roadmaps and dependencies and resources to really building a sustainable MarTech solution.
Yes. So yes, as I mentioned, we bridge the gap as much as possible with product and other teams. The way I like to look at it is that I am always trying to sell an idea. So sometimes it's very easy to get frustrated because other teams kind of don't always want to readily join you on what you're doing. So I like to take a look at it from a sales point of view. So whenever I have an idea, I see that I pitch it in the best way possible. And the way to do that, I think, is focusing on value. So as much as possible, we always try to make sure that we show the value to the product team or to any other team. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's a direct value, sometimes it's something that can be easily measured. And sometimes when it's something a bit more long-term or strategic, we have to kind of try to paint the long-term picture, paint the big picture. And we try to do that as best as we can. What I found personally to be very helpful is to start small, like whenever possible. So even if it's a big project, I try to start as small as possible, create some kind of proof of concept when that's possible, or even start with a small deliverable. It's easier to sell. It's easier for them to deliver. And it's easier to start showing results, which then kind of build the confidence of the other team. Because many times, like for example, if you look at product, they tend to look at the company from a different angle. They don't always see the same picture, and it's not always easy for other teams to see the same thing that you're seeing. But once people start getting results, then it's very easy for them to develop more confidence and give it more of a push.
And just to dig into that a bit more before we move on, who are you selling to? Are you selling to the product teams, to the marketing teams, to the kind of senior leaders?
Yeah, so that's a very good point. So it really depends. So sometimes it's just product that we need, but even within, for example, in our company, Betsson, so even product teams are split into further smaller teams. So sometimes you need a mix of those teams. It's not always as easy as just going to one person and getting it sorted. What I find to be really helpful is making sure you have the right people to speak to. So I always like to have someone who understands, has enough experience to understand what we're trying to sell, and at the same time you need the people that have the authority to actually get things in the roadmap and get them pushed. So getting the right people on board is very important. Many times, like you're mentioning, it could be a mix of a few different teams. So for example, some of the projects that we're working on now, they involve product, they involve site optimization, they involve data analytics. So that's also a challenge in trying to put together, sometimes we call it like a task force, right, with representatives from each of those, and selling the vision to that entire set of teams.
Brilliant. And Moshe, from your side, how do you, as a platform provider, kind of assist the operator in building out that kind of story and that business case to then sell back into the business?
Yeah, it's challenging. I think our space is quite challenging. I think the first thing we always try to do is to make sure that we are, educating the person we are speaking with. First of all, on the marketing tech landscape and ecosystem. So, what do we do? What others do? And trying to really break it into, different buckets, so they first can understand, the differences and what do they need. I think we are lucky enough today. We are working with more than 400 brands in the industry, so we have lots of social proof, and we can share that, and we can, tell other, operators that are actually, they need help, what good looks like, and how should they get there. So we use a lot of our best practices, but in many cases, it's all about kind of understanding the pain points and understanding the way the teams are structured, which usually that's probably the biggest barrier for us in partnering with a business. It's less about the technology they have. It's more about the way they are structured and the different functions and how they operate, because sometimes in order to transform your marketing tech stack, you need to completely transform the organization. And obviously that's scary. That's something that a lot of businesses will avoid. And this is a big one for us. This is something that we try to tackle and really help them to do it in a way that will make sense for them.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point around the structure, because, again, going back to what I said at the beginning, like MarTech as a concept means different things to different people, and certainly in my experience, and it seems like this way across the board, like you have kind of acquisition sat over here, CRM sat over here, product sat over there, and everyone's got their own kind of idea of what MarTech is, and there's various different ad tech platforms or experiences built in silos, and it's quite difficult to have that end-to-end customer experience. I think, James, it'd be good to understand from your side, obviously we spoke this morning around how you're more focused on the acquisition side, how that kind of is set up within your organization and how you try and work alongside the CRM and retention teams.
Yeah, I mean, MarTech generally sort of has a centralized function rather than siloed or in terms of specific markets or geos. So it's very important to sort of, yeah, I guess, as you were saying, educate the teams as to what it can bring them in terms of the acquisition side or the CRM side. And I'm not a particularly technical person, but I like to understand the technology and how it works. And it's like essentially like when my dad gets a new phone, like it's just like, oh my God. As in, if you just do that to everyone, you're never going to succeed. So you have to sit down with the teams and walk them through the platforms and show them how it works. And that goes a long way to getting people to buy into what the product can do and how it can benefit them.
And when we talk about validating the work that we're doing and moving more into the kind of measurement and ROI piece, what do you think are the challenges around that measurement and working within an environment that's very sort of short-term focused and all about, for example, from your point of view, I imagine driving down CPAs and very, very quick campaign by campaign analysis, whereas really a kind of sustainable MarTech strategy is all about long-term LTVs and building that kind of holistic customer experience. What do you think are the challenges around how we kind of move towards that level of attribution?
I mean, in terms of, on the acquisition side, demonstrating a reduction of the CPA or the cost per FTD is reasonably simplistic in terms of the measurement side. And yeah, luckily in terms of my previous roles, I managed to demonstrate generally around a sort of 40% improvement on that, which is quite substantial. And in some markets, even more, where it's a very competitive market and difficult market. Around the sort of retention piece, it's a little bit harder, and as you said, it's more on sort of LTV. But from an acquisition perspective, if you have the right data and the right tools, you can go after those players that have the likelihood that they will become those high-value customers.
And Moshe, from your side, obviously, Optimove is based on driving that kind of long-term LTV customer value. How do you bring that expertise into the organization to help, perhaps like the marketing teams or product teams tell that long-term story?
In terms of attribution, you mean? Or?
Yeah, the measurement of success.
Yeah, we try to make sure that I think one of the probably the main key differentiator for us, and it always been this way, is that we rely on first-party data to really measure every campaign that we send out. That's the was always part of our vision, and I think probably 10 years ago it was very hard to convince people because ad tech 10 years ago was huge. People invested out into acquisition. You had lots of clicks data and lots of third-party data that people were sending in, which you can rely on for different attribution models that mainly were based on last click. I think today, with death of the cookie, iOS 15, a very limited data that you are getting from other sources, and especially like social, Facebook and Google, which are walled gardens, the only way to really measure your campaigns, your CRM work, is by actually using revenue attribution. And this is a big part of what we believe in. So actually, everything we do, every campaign we send out, or every journey that is built in the system, always have this hold-up group, those control group, so you can actually measure the real lift. And I think it's actually one of the reasons that we are quite successful in gaming is that operators always appreciated it and always looked at a campaign from a net gaming revenue perspective, not from clicked or bets or anything like that. Because if you give out bonuses, you really want to understand whether you're actually creating cannibalism and maybe you're losing money because you gave a bonus which is too high and you have your active customers still coming and playing anyway. So the attribution piece is huge for us. And it's much easier to then prove value and then justify the solution because you always report back on actual results.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting talking about kind of the metrics through which we measure success. Obviously, naturally, we're all focused on revenue generation, but there are other ways to use MarTech to measure the success of journey optimization or customer experiences. I know, John, we were speaking about it this morning. Yeah. What's the sort of other ways that you use to kind of measure success, particularly from a kind of product and experience point of view?
Yes. So like you said, sometimes it's easy to measure perhaps performance. So ideally, we always want to measure the commercial performance, so it's, the deposits, the revenue, stuff like that. But sometimes, like when things start getting a bit more complicated, for example, is when there's a lot of other factors impacting the end result, right? So, for example, thing like, I don't know, like a welcome bonus or branding efforts that are happening simultaneously. So what we try to do usually there is we use what I like to call lead goals or lead metrics. So basically, we find a metric that is directly affected by what we're doing, so there is no question. So let's say if we did something to improve site speed, for example, we know that the metric of bounce rate is going to be directly affected. And then what we do is we try to connect that to the final result, the final commercial result. So for example, then we can use, let's say, industry benchmarks, right? For example, we know in this case that as load time increases, bounce rate decreases by a certain amount, or looking even back at company data to see what typical what are the typical conversion rates that we have, and then we connect those together, right? So we have the metric that we know we're affecting and how it ties in, how it kind of connects to the end result. And sometimes it's not always possible also to measure commercial performance. Like, for example, one thing we work a lot is automations. We automate a lot of processes that needed automating. So the metrics there are things like time saved, for example, which could, in the end, still connect to commercial performance if that time and focus is now being used in a more creative and valuable way. But the metric then would be something like time saved, for example.
Yeah, and I think obviously when you have one platform doing everything, it's a lot easier to have the data all in one place, and the kind of measurement is a lot more straightforward. Whereas if you go for a more best of breed approach and you have multiple different platforms that are integrated, doing perhaps different things within the chain, attribution becomes a bit more difficult. On the flip side, the customer experience might be better because you're actually using different platforms for what they're best at, rather than trying to shoehorn experiences into the one platform. It'd be good to get your views, guys, on the debate around whether you have a best of breed strategy or whether you have a single platform strategy. Maybe James, starting with you.
I mean, yeah, if it's possible, having a single solution is always preferred. It just simplifies everything, certainly when it comes to attribution. If you have multiple platforms, it becomes a lot more difficult. Certainly on the sort of programmatic side, if you have multiple platforms bidding on the same ad inventory, you're just going to push up your prices and compete with yourself, and then you have the difficulty of trying to work out who actually managed to generate the FTD or the acquisition. So yeah, that's generally the preferred approach from my perspective. Obviously, in certain markets, in certain areas, there will always be some sort of outliers where you might need to use a local provider or something like that to get access to specific inventory or various options there. So yeah, that would generally be my preferred kind of approach. And certainly when it comes to sort of data management platforms as well, it's very important. But I think with that, you generally have a lot of sort of interest in having access to all the data all the time, and sometimes that can kind of essentially cause people to lose sight of what they're actually trying to achieve with that data. And so sometimes just focusing on the basic solutions, the basic data options within as many platforms as you can also be beneficial.
And I think obviously, Moshe, a biased opinion coming from Optimove, but it's quite interesting to see Optimove's strategy, particularly in the last 3 or 4 years, on kind of acquiring different businesses to plug into their entire ecosystem. It'd be good to understand your view on the way the market's going and how Optimove are adapting.
Yeah, I think I'll surprise you, Sam. I think that I don't think there is one right answer. I think best of breed is still probably the right solution for many brands. It really depends. I think, we obviously, over the years, 10 years ago, we used to work just in a best of breed setup. So we used to sit on top of, Salesforce Marketing Cloud or Silverpop or, whatever one-to-one communication that was out there. And over the years, we received a lot of, feedback from our own clients that, wow, it would be much simpler if we would just, do the emails with you guys as well. Not everyone, some of them. So we added all of those channels. I still think probably you need some flexibility, like 20% of your tech stack should be different other things that you are doing that are, as James mentioned, are either very specific for a market, I don't know, it's Line in Japan or different SMS integrations in specific places and so on and so forth. And I think what we always need to remember is that a lot of people, when they look at the big marketing clouds, they often look at it as one solution. But really, if you use Salesforce or Oracle or Adobe, the different solutions you get within the suite are also kind of disjointed. So it's very hard to find something that does everything. So I think you need the flexibility to connect different things. Also, like, a system you build in-house. But try to have at least the majority of it in one place.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think in my experience, the kind of ideal solution is to have this one size fits all, but you never end up actually having that. You end up trying to shoehorn different experiences in which don't really work. So I think best of breed, if done in the right way, is probably the approach I would take. But I'm coming from a product point of view. It's interesting to kind of get the opposing view from a marketing side. I think, John, it'd be good to understand from your side when it comes to actually development of that platform. What are the complexities around that best of breed versus one size fits all?
Yeah, I mean, on this topic, it's like we were mentioning this morning, Moshe, it's always a bit of a trade-off, right? So best of breed usually give you more features, more flexibility, a bit perhaps more power typically to do different things. Whereas if you have one platform, it's going to keep things simpler, which is great. I'm very big fan of doing things simply. Because, I mean, marketing technology is great, but it's also expensive. It's not just expensive in the sense of paying for it, but it's also expensive in setting it up, maintaining it, maintaining the data. So I think it's really a question of how much do you really need the best of breed platforms? If you really cannot do without it, then go for that. But if you can keep things simpler, right? And you can go for one platform that connects everything, and you know that you're going to be able to work comfortably with that, then I would definitely go for that as well. In bigger companies like Betsson, sometimes that's a bit more difficult, all teams have their own ways of working, and sometimes these things have been set up years before, so changing is not always easy, but yes.
Brilliant. Look, we've only got 4 minutes left. I want to leave some time for questions, but there's one topic that I think we don't really cover enough, which is the customer, and we kind of get so stuck into the tech and the product or the campaigns, we kind of forget that there's an actual real life person at the end of it all. And I think Oliver in the previous session mentioned the fact around like Google and all these other kind of providers blocking cookies, changing the way that we can track, and everyone's so like scared around sharing data. If we kind of stop for a minute and ask like why that is the case, when in real life, if I go and get my hair cut at the barber's, I'm much more comfortable with someone that knows exactly how my hair's been cut for the last 10 years. And if I go to the pub and I ask for a drink and the person who's pouring the drink knows my usual drink and pours me my usual drink, I feel much more at home and comfortable with that pub. Whereas online, we have the opportunity to do that. We have the opportunity to provide a completely personalized experience that should make people feeling really happy and at home. Whereas what we have is this customer base of people that are so scared to share anything with us because there's just a complete lack of trust in the industry. So it'll be interesting to understand like how we've managed to actually get into that position where really like data and personalization should be this amazing thing that everyone wants to share and kind of love. And it's ended up being this thing that's all about kind of privacy and secrecy. So it'd be interesting to understand, Moshe, from your side, how we've kind of got into that and how we get out of it.
Yeah, it's a big one. I think we really try to be in a place where like we are using data in a way which is not creepy, right? Like you don't want to scare people and so I think I mean there are many examples. I think at the end of the day, really trying to look at what like the almost every campaign every customer individually, in order to understand their preference, because some customers would like to get communicated on a very high frequency and get lots of promotions, others are less, and so really understanding their preferences and make sure we are taking it into consideration. But I can give you an example about the last company we acquired, Graphite, which is actually doing content personalization on the website. And they have this really neat, sophisticated algorithms, which like a Netflix-style algorithms, which basically will present the next best game for you or the next, the next slot machine, whatever it is. And they actually understood after a time that they want to include a tooltip that is saying, this is recommended for you, but this is why. Because people like you played similar game, because of your, playing history, and people actually resonate with it much more when you explain. You just not like you're not just using fancy AI to do it. You tell them it's actually based on a simple heuristic, which is not so simple, but it makes them feel much better. So I think that's what we are trying to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree that remembering that there's a real person at the end and actually communicating with them and being open and honest is really helps drive that trust, which is hugely important. I think we've got a minute and a half left. Maybe if anyone's got any questions in the audience for any of the panel, don't be shy. No? Come on, someone ask a question. Okay, look, I think it's been great. I think obviously MarTech, generally speaking, is something that is only going to get more complex and bigger as we kind of move into a more sort of metaverse world. Although again, I'm a bit more skeptical than others on whether that will take off in this industry or not. But look, it's something that needs to be invested in more, not just from a platform point of view, but from a people, from an understanding, from a teams, and how we build our businesses around MarTech. So it's great to have like experts on the panel talking about how we can achieve that. And if anyone comes up with a question later on, well, after a few drinks, then come find us on the roof. But thank you very much, and thanks to the panel.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you very much. Thanks, guys.